Vandalism is illegal and you shouldn't do it because it's a crime. But in a hypothetical world where, let's say you lived in a massively unequal society where things really need to change, there's an upcoming threat of, climate destruction. Some people are amassing wealth to a degree where you could call them aristocrats or oligarchs, right? In this hypothetical, right, where social change would be required for a healthy, free, and happy society. In that case, I'm not against vandalism. I don't think vandalism is bad. And one of the things I don't like when vandalism is denounced is not the fact that, you shouldn't do it. If you believe that you shouldn't do vandalism or that it's a bad thing, I don't actually mind, right? It's your opinion, whatever. What does get under my skin, however, is when people assume intent on the part of the vandals. For example, you see that very, very, very often when there are protests. They will say the peaceful protesters are the ones who go there with the right ideas and they want to have their voices heard. You've heard that rhetoric already. But the ones who break things, they're opportunists. They're there just to wreck things. They just want to have the thrill. They're not part of the movement, actually. They're just, in French, we call them les casseurs. People who don't give a fuck about the protest or the movement. They're just there to break shit and to fuck shit up. And that's their whole purpose. No ideological, no values, no ideas that are actually supporting any of their actions. They're just doing it for the thrill. They're just doing it for fun. They're just doing it to ruin the moment. And what annoys me about that is that first, you're being an assumer if you believe that. But there's also something that's quite damaging in that kind of rhetoric. To say that when people are vandals or vandalists, they're not doing it for the movement, they're doing it for themselves. Because what you're doing is you're delegitimizing any action that is not peaceful. You can do that in bad faith, but you can't genuinely, with actually good faith, assume the intentions of people unless they make it very clear. But people who go to a protest and start fucking shit up, you don't know why they're doing it. And very often people who believe that they're just fucking shit up for the sake of fucking shit up are not necessarily versed in protest history, because the protests where things get fucked up are very often protests who will either A, make history, or B, actually change something, which, both are the same, I guess. So when you assume someone's intentions, you're delegitimizing what they're doing, and you're delegitimizing also the movement in a way. Because what you're saying is that this movement is solely pacifistic, or is only people who are pacifists, who are not actually angry enough to fuck shit up, who are not actually engaged enough to want to break things. And there is, in breaking things, a form of militancy as well. Maybe eventually we'll read How Nonviolence Protects the State by Peter Gelderloos. Sometimes I'll read that and I'm like, sometimes it's a bit scary, but a lot of times it's actually really insightful. He talks about how, for example, the March on Washington was made peaceful by Washington authorities. What I want you to imagine is, if instead of being peaceful, all these people decided to be violent, do you think the situation for Black people in America would have been different? Do you think things could have gone differently? You could argue it would have gone for worse, but I think you can also argue that it would have gone for better, right? Another example of violence in protests is the Stonewall riot, which one day we might learn about by reading the Wikipedia, because that's how I learn about things, which was violent. But I think it's important to recognize, at least with vandalism, that very often it's a legitimate way of expressing yourself in terms of wanting things to change. Because the thing is, if doing petitions, if voting, if doing peaceful protests worked, there would be no need for vandalism and for violent demonstrations. Oh, what I'm saying right now makes me think of a quote, how maybe you've heard about that riot is the language of the unheard. Have you heard about that? That's basically what I'm trying to say. When the unheard riot and you delegitimize their voice, if you agree that riot is the language of the unheard, you're making it so that the unheard keep being unheard by saying that if there's a riot, if there's violence, there's no ideas that are behind them. So what you're doing is that you keep silencing the unheard.